Hello, I'm Sister Joanne Ionati, and I'm Art and Spirituality Coordinator at Wisdom House Retreat and Conference Center in Litchfield, Connecticut. When was the last time you were embraced? Embraced by someone whom you loved and loved you back. It's a wonderful experience of life exchanging with life and new life coming from it. This past weekend, we've had a wonderful retreat at Wisdom House entitled Embracing Wisdom, looking at wisdom as a name for God that is found in the scriptures. And that this particular retreat was focused on a group of women who had the opportunity to come to Wisdom House to share with author and artist Jan Richardson thoughts about embracing wisdom at the transition points in our life.
One of the things that we have spent some time talking about is my conviction that in order to survive and to thrive as individuals and communities and as a planet, that thriving really depends on our ability to reflect on what has gone before, to reflect on our lives as individuals and as community, and to read those experiences, to reflect on those experiences so that we can glean the wisdom that comes from those experiences and to recognize the presence of God in those experiences in ways that we weren't always aware of at the time that we were in the midst of having that experience. And in the course of our retreat, we've been talking about doing some exploring with a tool that the Christian tradition gives us, a very ancient practice that the Christian tradition gives us that helps us reflect on our experiences as individuals and as communities. It's a kind of practice that is present in various faith traditions. And in the Christian tradition, it's called Lectio Divina, which means sacred reading. And it's a way of praying with scriptures and other sacred texts that, as one person has described it, it's a way of praying with the Word of God, so that the Word of God becomes a means of union and communion with God. And the traditional understanding of Lectio Divina, the traditional practice of it, it's a way of praying with the Scriptures, of praying with the Bible, focusing on just a few verses at a time. It's Lectio Divina, this sacred reading, is not the same thing as Bible study. It's a complement to Bible study, but in the space of Lectio Divina, it's an invitation to enter into the landscape of the story and to receive the text as a story and to focus in on just a few verses and to reflect with them, to sit with them, to pray with them, to chew on them so that we can feast on the wisdom, to feast on the sustenance that is there and present in the scriptures. I was sharing with the group last evening that the first person who really taught me about Lectio was a Dominican nun who calls Lectio Divina, sometimes she calls it Lectio Bovina, from the bovine, the cow, because Lectio does have that quality of chewing and chewing and chewing so that we get the stuff, the sustenance that feeds us from the sacred scriptures. But Lectio, and this is something we've been particularly exploring in the course of the weekend, Lectio is something that we do not only with the written text of the Bible or some other sacred text that comes to us in written form on a page, but Lectio is something that we can do also with the text of our own lives, with the sacred text of our own lives. There's one person who's written about this kind of Lectio, and he calls it Lectio on life. And it's the understanding that we find the sacred in the midst, in the presence of our own story, and that we, as creatures created by God, carry stories inside us, and that Lectio is a tool that helps us do this work of reflecting on our lives so that we can glean the wisdom of what has gone past, not just for the sake of ruminating on what's happened to us, but to draw wisdom from it, to glean wisdom from it, to help guide us on the path ahead. And I think that notion, for me, I know in my own practice, that notion of doing Lectio on life and that I carry a sacred text inside myself has been a really powerful notion. That idea that God is in the process of continuing to write me, to create me, and to create a sacred text with my own life, and that God engages my story and invites me to reflect on my story. In the process of doing Lectio on Life, it's a way of reflecting on experiences, on things that have happened in our past, and to pray with and contemplate and reflect on those experiences so that we can begin to discern how God was present in those experiences in ways that we might not have recognized when we were in the midst of it. One of the things that came up in conversation with one of the folks last night was that she had this sense that it was hard for her to hear the phrase or to try to receive the idea that her own life was a sacred text, because she had the sense that her story wasn't worthy of being a sacred story. And I think our lives, for me, when I hear something like that, it's helpful, and sometimes when I try to engage the painful places in my own sacred text, it's helpful for me to remember that even in looking at our own written sacred scriptures in the Christian tradition, looking at the Bible is full of hard and challenging stories. There are some incredible places of pain in the Bible. And yet in the midst of that, God is always present and working and in seeking after us, after God's people. And so that helps inform the way that I read my own life. And when I say that our lives are sacred texts, it doesn't mean that they're always pleasant texts, that they're always happy stories that we carry around inside us. We carry places within us that are inscribed with pain. But God is present in those stories, and perhaps especially in those stories, to transform those painful words, those painful texts that have been inscribed on our souls through whatever experiences that we have had in our lives. And God can transform those texts into stories of grace and beauty and joy. One of my absolute most favorite things about being with folks in a retreat setting is having the opportunity to bear witness to the incredible stuff that comes out when people are given time and tools and space to reflect on their lives. I've invited people to create books and to create pages in their books using collage or writing, and inviting them to spend time talking together in smaller groups, so that we can have the opportunity to bear witness to what one another, to what we are each creating. And I think that's part of our call as people of faith, in intimate ways, in the ways that we're doing in the course of this weekend, as we open the text of our lives, as we open the pages of our books and share what we have created through writing and through artwork. That is a very intimate way of bearing witness to one another and to the process of God's creating in one another and reading one another's lives together. And my hope is that people feel invited to go from this weekend and find ways to bear witness in their own lives, in their own communities, in intimate ways, in one-to-one conversations, as well as in more communal and global kinds of ways. I think we too, in our time, have a duty to bear witness to the pain as well as the astounding beauty that is present in our world. And that is part of the invitation of Lectio Divina as well, to not only read our own sacred text as individuals, but to read the landscape of the community and to read the landscape of the world.